take it away.
Good morning, everybody. To the University of South Florida team, thank you for participating. Thanks for your work and preparation to come to this day. We look forward to your presentation. I'm going to introduce the judges, myself, as well as read a short set of instructions for everyone to be aligned, aware of how we're doing the full presentation session here this morning. First, my name is Kenneth Harrington. I lead research and development for urology and critical care here in Covington, Georgia, about 30 miles east of Atlanta. I've been with IBEC for several years, and it's been my privilege to join you all again this year. I'll ask Allison and Bob to introduce themselves.
So you want us to introduce ourselves?
Yes, Allison. So if you might just share, where you are, what you do in America.
So I'm Alison Taunton Rigby. I'm a life science biotech healthcare person, former CEO of some biotech companies, currently sit on some boards. I'm in the Boston area, and I'm on Bentley University's advisory board, ethics advisory board.
Excellent. And Bob?
Trying to figure out, all right, there's the video. I'm Bob Stone. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm a retired federal executive. I've done consulting work for a bunch of cities and states. I've taught business ethics at the University of Redlands and written several books, including one called The Ethics Challenge. And this is, I judged for Tom White back at LMU a few years back, and this is my first time back with IBEC in a while.
Really good. Bob, Allison, thanks for your time today, and thanks for joining us. Okay, USF team, just give me a moment. I'm going to read through the presentation instructions, and then I'll let you begin when you're ready. So this is a full presentation portion of the agenda. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You will have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion. Describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. Legal. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for about 20 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and the judges will remain in character. After the Q&A, the judges will share feedback outside of the role-playing scenario. Some important things to keep in mind. First, the ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion, using technical, philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. Okay. So USF team, any questions for me before we begin? Everyone looks like they're on mute. Okay, very good. I'm going when you are, and I'll start the timer when you all begin. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to wait until I see everyone's good. Okay, perfect. And then Belly, if you can share your screen.
It says host has disabled participant screen sharing.
I've rectified that. You should be good.
Thank you very much.
Just give it a sec.
There we go.
If you click through, if you just make sure it's all
Can
good.
somebody remind me what the judge's role is supposed to be? Are we members of the board of Boeing?
Yeah, so, and I'll also cover it in our presentation, but you guys will be the board of directors at Boeing, and then we will be a consulting company known as Aero.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, perfect. And I will get started if everyone's ready. Perfect. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the board of directors at Boeing for inviting us here at Aero to speak with you today. As the world's largest aerospace company, Boeing has been associated with safety and reliability for as long as the brand has existed. However, on October 29th of 2018, when a Lion 737 MAX airplane fell out of the sky, and more recently on February 18th, when the Netflix documentary entitled Downfall, the case against Boeing surfaced, Boeing's public image, as well as their stock prices, have dropped significantly. Boeing has positively impacted so many lives, and yet that history of safety has completely dissolved. This is the case for Paul Najuri, who on March 10th of 2019 didn't just lose one person to Flight 302, but instead lost his mother-in-law, his wife, and his 3 children. Every single person from his family gone. And the reason for this is because it kind of happens similar to a Lion Air crash that happened only a few months prior. So in Indonesia on October 29th of 2018, 189 people lost their lives after a 737 took off and crash landed within minutes of the flight going up. Originally, Boeing had publicly stated that it was the pilot's fault, and if they were American, it probably wouldn't have happened. But after some internal review, it turned out that this was actually a problem of the MCAS system. Now, the pilots didn't actually know that this system existed, and they asked for new training on this entire new airplane that they were getting. But Boeing stated that that training wasn't really needed, all the while adding this new system. What the system effectively does is reorientates the plane. So whenever it's perhaps going up a little too high, it's able to push it back down. And that's exactly what it did. However, there was some misreadings by this tiny little sensor, because if that little sensor that's on your screen that's circled, if that sensor is damaged or if it's defective, then the plane will crash because there is no other safety implementations for it. There's not a second sensor or anything like that. And that's what happened on October 29th with this crash. However, Boeing stated that it was a simple problem and it could be fixed within a few weeks. So these planes continued flying. Then in Ethiopia on March 10th of 2019, the same type of plane, the 737, took off and once again, within a matter of minutes, crashed with 157 dead. And less than 5 months since that previous crash, Boeing had said that the plane was safe to fly, and yet once again, because of the MCAS system, it crashed. Once again, Boeing tried to blame the pilots. However, this time the pilots followed exactly what Boeing had instructed them to do in a situation like this, and the plane still crashed. Because of these incidents, as Boeing well knows, these planes across the world were grounded, costing Boeing a fortune. Lawsuits continuously manifested, and of course, it hurt Boeing's stock price. Now, this was extremely bad as a PR rep, but after 2020, these planes were allowed to start flying again. And then we have our third crash, which is China Eastern Airlines, and it actually happened a month from today, a month previous to today. So late in FAA released a report in 2018 that effectively stated that these planes were likely to crash every 2 years. Once again, I mentioned that these planes were allowed to fly back in 2020, and 2 years later, we have a same crash with the same MO. It went up, or the flight was flying, and then it nose dipped about 20,000 feet, gained 1,200 feet until its final plummeting, which is exactly what happened with the other 2 crashes. So now we have this major crash. We have a Netflix documentary that just premiered, and Boeing is facing a PR nightmare. Something needs to be done. That's first, we're going to start with Julia, our ethical engineering consultant, who's going to help us provide a few of the ethical insights into this problem, as well as some financial looking at it a little bit later. Then we're going to get to Belly, who's our legal consultant and public relations consultant, who will evaluate both the legal and public relations impacts of this problem. And finally, I will help you look to a solution that can start to mend these problems. Boeing is known for safety. Boeing is known for their craft. And before Airbus fully takes over, Boeing needs to do something about it. So first, let's get this started with Julia.
Thank you very much, Tijen. So Boeing has a long and prideful history of being the leader in innovation in aerospace for many, many, many years. People used to look to Boeing for any innovation in commercial airline flight and for the safest flights that were available. And this was because of their dedication to the engineering code of ethics and their own code of ethics and code of conduct. As an engineering firm, they were trustworthy. They were looked up to. They were the leaders in the industry. But something has gone wrong with the way Boeing was operated in the past few years. And the crashes with Lion Airlines as well as Ethiopian Airlines are a symptom of a greater problem with this going away and from their ethical canons. And so what went wrong with these crashes is something that I'll be analyzing, specifically the violations of the National Society of Professional Engineers Code of Ethics, specifically the fundamental canon, the precautionary principle, informed consent, as well as Boeing's own code of conduct, the prioritization of safety, quality, and integrity above profit, which became conflicted and confluated in the past couple of years when Boeing began as an engineering firm moving away from the engineering principles and prioritizing profit above safety. So if we look at the first Lion Air crash, we can see here that there were several issues brought to concern. Even before the 737 MAX planes were released to the public, we see that Boeing now, in hindsight, was ignoring internal concerns raised by employees about the safety of the 737 MAX plane. Now, Boeing at the time was marketing the plane as something that did not require any additional pilot training, which not only saved them money financially, but also expedited the release of the plane because additional shuttle training was not necessary for these pilots. These pilots would theoretically be able to fly any other 737 plane as well as the 737 MAX. Now, there were internal concerns raised over this, and in fact, looking back on it, especially in employee voices that were heard in the documentary as well as in the following trials, we see that there was a culture of fear of retaliation for people that raised safety concerns. Employees were worried that their pay would be docked or that they would be fired. And so we see a loss of a lot of the skilled employees because of these issues. We also see Boeing ignoring the prioritizing profit above safety and quality assurance. Even after the first Lion Air crash, when things were slightly unclear, Boeing ignored the significance of the FAA report that my partner mentioned. This report basically marked Boeing's 737 MAX plane as the most dangerous plane in existence. Boeing said that they would fix these issues and apply pilot training, but they still did not take full accountability for this issue, which led to the second crash with Ethiopian Airlines. Even after this crash and the weeks following, Boeing still did not claim full accountability, and the previous CEO proclaimed that the plane was still safe. Not only at this point did Boeing ignore the fundamental canon of prioritizing safety of the public, they also ignored the other tenets, such as the precautionary principle. They continued to risk the lives of these people even when the updates for this plane were not yet available, as well as informed consent of the pilots and the passengers who did not know what they were getting into when they had such a dangerous system available on the plane that was completely new to them. Now, this was 2018 and 19. Boeing since has had a new CEO come into existence. And so we see that Boeing has in recent years moved towards a more ethical future by restating and reaffirming their dedication and commitment to the fundamental canon of engineering ethics. And that is proclaiming prioritization of paramount safety, health, and welfare of the public. They have also added to new bits to the code of conduct and values, saying, I will never retaliate against or punish anyone who speaks up about concerns. This is to help rectify those issues that were previously present in 2018 and 19, which in the incidents that led up to these terrible crashes. However, we see in recent years that these issues have still not fully gone away. It's only been a few years since the first and second crashes of the Boeing 737 MAX impacts. And these impacts are still reverberating throughout the company, not only financially and legally, but also in the main basic issue where quality inspectors and quality assurance staff have been cut from Boeing. Now, we see this in Boeing's good intent in order to do this to implement more digital technologies, because from a basic intent standpoint, more digital technology means more accuracy in creating parts, which means less defects. However, we can see in the past recent years that this hasn't been the case. Not only has Boeing continued to face losses on the 737 impact, but we also see continued losses and new setbacks with the 747 Dreamliner, who has continued to face continuous structural defects as well as setbacks within production. The FAA grounded 8 of these planes after they made it onto the runway in 2021. And now, for the first time ever, the FAA is inspecting Boeing planes themselves instead of Boeing hiring inspectors to report to the FAA for them. This is monumental and extremely detrimental to not only Boeing's reputation, but also to Boeing's pride as an engineering firm. Making sure that we correct these quality assurance inspectors and staff and going and returning back to the engineering dedication to those values and ethical principles at the core is necessary for Boeing to move on as a company, not only financially, but also ethically. And with that, I would like to hand it off to my partner, Belly, to talk about some of the legal ramifications that Boeing is currently facing.
Thank you very much, Julia. So I will explore the legal standing of Boeing as it is now. I will then get into some of the public relations issues facing Boeing and how those may impact Boeing's legal standing going forward. But beginning with Boeing's legal standing as it is now. Boeing recently had a settlement with the Department of Justice for $2.5 billion just a few months ago in February. This settlement surrounded the grounding of these 737 MAX airplanes, and roughly $1.9 billion within that $2.5 billion settlement was given towards airline companies as a retroband for the loss in revenue of the grounding of the planes. What this essentially means is it opens up the door for other potential lawsuits due to potential losses due to these groundings of these planes. And we can see that with an ongoing International Pilots Coalition lawsuit that is currently going through the courts as we speak. We also see ongoing lawsuits with the families of victims from these crashes. And as it stands, although many of these cases are still ongoing, some of them have been settled, and those settlements are averaging at about $1.2 million apiece. When we add together all of the victims of the crashes, we can see that that has a potential liability of nearly $500 million, not even to include the legal fees that would come from those as well. But moving on to some of the PR issues that Boeing is currently facing, and to understand those, we're going to separate them into domestic public relations and international public relations. Starting with the domestic public relations, we can see that there is widespread bipartisan negative perception of Boeing present within the halls of Congress. Many of you from the board of directors at Boeing might even remember the congressional hearings after the 2 crashes in which Congress grilled the board of directors for their quote unquote negligence of safety. We can clearly understand that this does not have a positive effect on Boeing going future, both within a newsworthy standpoint in which the consumers may be viewing this, as well as from a regulatory standpoint. And we can further see this with the newly appointed Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, and his very public interactions with Boeing. For example, when he went to the news organizations, explaining how he met with many of the families of the victims of the 2 original crashes. And in these meetings, he openly discussed how many of these families were advocating for the lack of safety concerns present within Boeing at the time, and saying that it's something he will look into. Furthermore, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has also stated that the United States will openly support China's investigation into China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735, as well as assist that very investigation. This is huge, coming from the director of the very regulatory body, the FAA, that regulates the Boeing, the aerospace industry. But there is much more beyond this domestic public relations, as we can explore some of the international public relations that faces Boeing. For example, the aforementioned Netflix documentary, Downfall: The Case Against Boeing, which aired on Netflix. This documentary was one of the most successful documentaries in Netflix's history, reaching the top 10 most viewed movies on Netflix for a brief amount of time, reaching millions of households worldwide. This left many consumers in a scramble, wondering if they are truly safe flying on Boeing planes, something that as a company, Boeing might not have thought would have been possible just a decade ago for consumers to question their safety on their planes. Furthermore, we can also see potential ramifications when it comes to public relations within China. China has a long history of regulations when it comes to Boeing, but especially with 737s. For example, China was the first country to ground the 737 MAX back in 2019. They were also one of the last countries to lift this very grounding. They lifted the grounding a whole year after the United States did, only lifting it less than a year ago in 2021. China has a very big history when it comes to regulating Boeing. And this is especially an issue with this most recent crash of China Eastern Airlines flight 5735, as that very company has grounded their own Boeing 737 planes with a potential ramification coming in the future. But what does this mean for Boeing? Well, we can see the potential for lawsuits, as ultimately, since the $2.5 billion settlement, a wide majority of that was payment towards airline companies with their own groundings. If there is another grounding that occurs, even if it is exclusive to China due to this most recent crash, that would open the door to a lot of settlement funds that Boeing cannot afford to pay. We can also see a heightened amount of regulation coming both domestically from the FAA as well as from the Civil Aviation Administration of China. Now, the Civil Aviation Administration of China would be detrimental towards Boeing if they were to increase their regulations, as 50% of all planes in China are Boeing planes. Coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, Boeing cannot afford to have to deal with a heightened amount of regulations concerning their planes, as simply they're already in the red. But to better discuss that very red that Boeing is in, I will hand it back off to my teammate, Julia, to discuss the financial standing of the company.
Thank you very much, Feli. So now to look at the financial impacts themselves from the 737 MAX incidents, as well as the years leading up to current 2022. Now, if we take a look just even at the revenue from the past 5 years, we can see that Boeing is still recovering from the impact of the 737 MAX. The dip begins in the first quarter of 2019, which is the location of the second crash with Ethiopian Airlines. We can see here that Boeing begins to lose revenue steadily throughout 2019 and 2022, as well as income, which we can see on the next slide. Now, Boeing has faced a unique situation where now in 2018, they intends of millions of dollars. They had all of this income and revenue due to the selling of the 737 MAX planes because the marketing was so successful. In the same turn, though, because of the issues with the 737 MAX, Boeing has faced a net loss in the past 3 years. We can see that in 2019, it was negative $636 million onto 11,941 million, and then still in the red in 2021 with $4,290 million. This is also correlated with an increase in debt in the past couple of years that is now accumulated to $47,248 million. Now, this is a major issue. And the reason for it is not only does Boeing have to pay these outstanding legal and other lawsuit fees that are still happening even now, but we can also see that they had to rectify the 737 MAX issues and return the planes and update that software. But we also see they're facing issues with the 747 MAX Dreamliner, as well as COVID itself. Now, COVID, you could argue, had an impact in 2020. Not only did airline travel essentially stop, but people still had to, Boeing still had all of these issues going on in the background. However, unlike other airline companies, if we take a look at Airbus's stock, we can see that other airline companies have continued to improve since COVID. Now we see that Airbus stock took a very heavy dip in the spring of 2020 when COVID started and the air travel bans began. But unlike Boeing, Airbus and other competitors have risen back to those previous profit and revenue levels. In fact, Airbus hit their historic highest profit level last year. But we can see that Boeing is still straggling behind. And what is the reason for this? Well, for one, the 737 MAX incidents are still having that heavy impact on Boeing as a company. We see this not only in legal issues, but also in just financial issues of recovering from that massive debt. When airline travel is considered one of the safest on the planet, and then we have 2 incidents where everyone in the plane dies within 5 months of each other, that takes a heavy hit on not only the public trust of Boeing, but also within the revenue states. We can also see that 747 production issues have become an increasing problem. In the 2021 risk assessment, Boeing admitted to the fact that the 747 production was going to set them back and going to continue to set them back. In fact, investors had more of a confidence in Airbus doing better in the coming years rather than Boeing because of these continuous production issues on top of 737 MAX issues and COVID all coalescing together. So what is the takeaway from this? Well, for one, Boeing is still facing the 737 MAX problems, and 747 production issues aren't making them any better. The only way for Boeing to move forward is to improve its quality assurance and inspections from the ground up. If Boeing continues to allow production setbacks because of a reliance on technology that it wasn't ready for, then this is an issue that's going to continue to compound and get worse in the future. Boeing will continue to have these setbacks because now they've removed the middleman and tried to replace it with technology like an automotive industry. Unfortunately, Boeing needs to go back to what Boeing does best. And to do this, we need to have a unique solution that my partner Tijen will now present.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's very clear that Boeing's public image has drastically dropped, and the recent plane crash indicates that the changes that were tried aren't fully working. This tells not only airlines, but all consumers that Boeing isn't forthcoming about safety information, which is the ultimate faux pas of selling planes. What is clear is that priorities within the company needs to change in order for Boeing to regain its title as the industry leader that it is. And by doing that, simply prioritizing safety over finances makes a huge difference. The old CEO was all about finances, and a lot of those implications still can be found in some of the plane making that's happening right now. And so there's just 2 simple changes that can be implemented into transitioning fully into this prioritization. First is internal change, and the second is external. So first of all, with internal change, while it does sound drastic in nature, really there's just a few simple things that Boeing can do that will implement this prioritization of safety. And that all starts on the ground level with allowing employees to express concerns freely. While this is in Boeing's code of conduct, as my partner Julia mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of employees still continue to come forward and mention that they can't express their concerns without feeling like their pay might be docked, or maybe they're just going to be fully fired. And in that Netflix documentary that we've been talking about, a lot of employees, previous employees, came up and started talking about their experiences. They focused on how debris and loose wires were all around the planes whenever they were being sent out. Now, what these loose wires kind of indicate is that when a plane is going up, its internal wiring can change if there's just loose wires hanging around. So a plane can just drop out because of a lot of those debris. Now, a major problem with this is that it's not just the 737 anymore that's continuing to have these problems. Instead, it could potentially be all planes because these employees aren't allowed to express what they feel is wrong. And this kind of flows into our next point, which is quality assurance. Boeing needs to rehire quality assurance agents that were originally fired back in 2016 when the competition of Airbus started to grow, and even more recently within 2021. We've seen with the new CEO that they're trying to transition into higher tech that will replace a lot of those inspectors. So there's good intention there. However, the few inspectors that are left aren't able to cover every single plane accurately. And so there's a lot of things that go on without human hands ever actually inspecting them. And we've seen a lot of problems resulting out of this. So by simply allowing those quality assurance to come back, Boeing can see massive improvements immediately. And next, whenever we're talking about kind of that ground level, we also need to focus a little bit on the higher ups, which is restructuring the safety board. Now, a lot of boards have a lot of different members on them. There's boards where the financial people are also on the safety board. And this means that there's a conflict of interest because the people who are on both the financial and the safety board are going to prioritize financials rather than safety. And safety ultimately needs to have the final say. It needs to be completely unbiased by anyone else and ensure that safety is the bottom line. Therefore, there can't be anyone on multiple boards at once, or else we'll have that conflict of interest. And so now we're going to shift over into that external change, which focuses a little bit more on the public and that PR nightmare that we've been discussing. First of all, Boeing needs to admit to the problem. Boeing's publicly hasn't actually admitted to the problem. They stated that there needs to be more training, and Boeing has implemented a lot of new training, and they've tried to fix a lot of their problems via that way. However, a lot of planes still result in that in-cast system that we were talking about earlier, and a lot of problems result within a few other things. So by simply admitting, as internal documents have already shown that Boeing knows, that this is a problem, it tells all consumers that Boeing is good for their word and they're going to be transparent about what's happening next. And this was actually proven in a study by the Nottingham School of Economics and a study in the Journal of Business Research, which happened as of 2020. But the study by the Nottingham School of Economics actually focused on how there was a 22% difference in how people actually reacted whenever a company apologized. It stated that people were 22% more likely to come back to a company and start to reinvest in them if they just apologized. And that's over financial compensation. That's over any other type of thing that a company can possibly do. So this is also a cheaper solution as well. By apologizing, Boeing can regain the trust of the public. And then finally, Boeing needs to recognize and officially apologize to the victims' families. Boeing has never officially recognized the victims' families. And whenever the old CEO went into the congressional hearing we were talking about, the only time in which he actually looked at the victims' families was whenever a congressman told him to do so. And he only looked for like a second. There's been no official apology or nothing on that basis. And by stating that you feel their pain, it tells every single consumer out there that you feel for them. And if it was their families, that Boeing was going to have their back too. That is the biggest thing that Boeing can do to start to regain the public's trust by simply admitting to this problem and apologizing. While it seems simple, this can do massive things, as a multitude of different studies have shown. So for a final few concluding thoughts, I'm going to hand it over to my partner, Belly.
Thank you very much, Tijan. Boeing has, through the prioritization of the streamlining of profits above safety, ultimately resulted in a dilemma concerning ethical gaps and legal and PR liabilities. The financial losses of the both of these have numbered in the billions, as not only has Boeing had to settle in $2.5 billion plus, but they've also lost revenue in hundreds of canceled contracts with airline companies due to concerns over safety. Boeing being in the red is not just attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also due to safety negligence within the company. This can clearly be seen, but it can also clearly be fixed. Boeing's biggest selling point in the past was always that they were the best aerospace engineering firm when it came to safety. It is imperative that Boeing returns to that standing. This sort of atmosphere, this PR nightmare can all be changed through the prioritization of safety across the board. And if Boeing is able to do so, then Boeing can fly into an ethical future. Thank you. And do we have any questions?
First of all, thanks for your presentation. It was well done. We do have some questions, and I just want to go ahead and begin. Thanks again for coming in, for covering the breadth of topics we asked you to review with our group, and most especially for your recommendations. Are you aware, or can you perhaps discuss previous episodes in Boeing's history when there had been frequent or recurring crashes for otherwise had been eventually identified as a common problem or issue, and how, if at all, were those Was that issue resolved? Has this been an episode we're going through now? Have there been previous episodes that you're aware of in Boeing's history?
So I can speak on to that a little bit, and if my partners want to add on, they can a little bit later. There hasn't been any major kind of problem like this. Well, there's been a few crashes repeatedly by different kind of airline or by different models of different planes. Mainly, it's usually a problem of the pilots. So Boeing was originally just kind of doing what they have done as a response to a lot of these other crashes. The problem is this time it's actually the plane, and they knew about that kind of problems a little bit beforehand. There's never been a major real problem, except perhaps in the beginning, whenever we were focusing on the beginning of commercial flight to begin with. But outside of that, really, there's no major problems that specifically an airplane has had until now.
I can add on a little bit to that. Present in many of the testimonials in some of the lawsuits that were waged against Boeing, we saw many workers who testified that this was a new shift that occurred within the last roughly decade or so, from that prioritization of safety into a streamlining of trying to get the profits as quickly as humanly possible. And so these very safety concerns might have been an issue in the past. However, what occurred would have been those workers were willing to stand up, and they did stand up and said, there's an issue with the safety of this plane, it should not be able to fly. And Boeing was very receptive of that criticism. And the issue is that that changed within roughly the past decade or so.
So can I, as a member of the board of directors, just thank you for your presentation. We really appreciate hearing your perspective of this. As a member of the current board, I would like to point out that we've changed the CEO. We have a different new CEO. The previous one is gone. We have many new members on the board of directors. And we see this as a deep tragedy. It's more than a PR issue. It's a tragedy that this has happened. And we have done, and we are doing a lot to try and understand. I think that the major issue we've uncovered internally is that we had not built in enough safety systems around this MCAS system. The fact that it relied on a single sensor. Previous iterations of this have two sensors. So we failed without question. We are doing all that we can now to rebuild our culture of safety. We've made a lot of changes. We also, I would just like to point out to you that the recent crash this few months ago in China was not a 737 MAX. And it's actually not clear yet what caused that particular problem, but we are working with China to look into it. We'll do everything we can. We really like your suggestions of how to improve our internal programs. We are open to any more new statements that you can make, ideas that you can generate for us to improve our internal safety. One of the challenges we've had is that the FAA passed over a lot of its inspections to us. I mean, that now is being reversed, but we relied on the FDA to certify that the plane was safe. So I know that you're concerned, we're concerned. I just want you to recognize that this is a challenge, and we're doing all that we can, and we welcome your suggestions on how to improve our QA, QC systems, and any other suggestions you can make, we really would appreciate.
Thank you. I didn't know if Julie was trying to say something, she's muted, but we appreciate it, and we're excited to kind of get going with a lot of these processes, especially whenever there's a few simple things that can be really done, especially since, as you've mentioned, the board has changed a lot, and they're ready to implement these changes, as we've seen with the new training. And a few of our solutions just implemented can really change and really focus on what Boeing is trying to do within the modern day and separate itself from the old Boeing that had a lot of those crashes. and start to kind of examine a lot of the internal safety problems that are there.
Yeah, we're really excited, especially as an engineer, that Boeing has taken more responsibility, more dedication to safety. I mean, your new CEO has visited the ground facilities within North Carolina as well as Florida himself in order to oversee the production of these new 747 Dreamliners and to help fix some of those issues. The problem is in what can be fixed and what we can do more, and the solution we're offering to you today is to rehire and reestablish those safety and inspector and quality assurance teams on the floor. Part of the issue Boeing is continuing to face, even trying to move forward with those safety inspections, is that in the aftermath and before the full changeover to the new team and the new board and the CEO, there was a really quick attempt to patch up the issue by establishing more digital technologies in order to kind of streamline the process of making the planes in order, for example, a manufacturer or a mechanic on the floor could use a digital sensor to sense the distance between certain gaps in the plane to order shims directly to fit those gaps. But part of the problem we see here is that this puts the reliance and inspection on a single manufacturer and or a single person to check and then double check themselves instead of having that second person come in and do another inspection. Now, this seems like a good idea, but problems have arisen from this, especially in the planes that were recalled. They were recalled because the shims were the wrong sizes in certain areas of the plane. And so while this technology could lead to a better future for Boeing, we need to make sure that the transition to it, as well as the implication of it, doesn't change or take away some of those safety backfalls that we have or Boeing did have in the past, which is something that we can do with Boeing in the future.
So do you think that we are making these airplanes too technical? I mean, the move is clearly within our industry to move towards flying by computer and not by people. And typically, most people believe that's improved the safety record of flying. I mean, flying does have overall a really good safety record. But are we making our planes too technical? I'm interested in your opinion about that.
If Julie wants to, oh, okay, cool.
I just wasn't sure. I think that Boeing has a unique opportunity and position to integrate more technology into its planes. I don't think that there is a future possible for Boeing where we do implicate and use this technology in a way that is beneficial, that doesn't completely remove the human factor. One of the issues with the 737 MAX planes is that it gave too much power to that technological side without having the safety factors and fallbacks of pilot control. And this caused the MCAS system to turn down the plane's tail too violently for the pilots to even correct for it. So I believe there is a future where technology and pilots work together in this way, and even from the manufacturing processes all the way up to the top. Technology can help improve, but without that human factor and that human a second check, we will always have issues with technology.
But do you have any specific recommendations for us, Boeing? Because this is, something that didn't seem to work out at Boeing, and others like Airbus have managed that. So I'm trying to understand how Boeing can improve.
Sure. So a lot of that is allowing the engineers to speak up. A lot of them raised kind of the concerns around what was happening with these planes. They kind of mentioned the one sensor issue, as well as how the technology only allowed for a certain gap for the pilots to actually do things. And so allowing the engineers who are actually building these planes to speak up about any problems instead of rapidly kind of setting a deadline that's just super quick for these engineers. Allowing them to have a little bit more time, as well as to speak up on any of these issues, can solve a lot of problems. And it puts that human perspective in there, because technology and something regarding safety can't really be rushed. And that's a lot of the problems that we've seen. And Airbus hasn't necessarily done that. They might take their time to kind of produce a lot of these planes. And Boeing has seen that as an opportunity to push more out, but instead they should look at it as a time to re-enhance their safety measures and listen to the engineers and what they're saying.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions for the board. First of all, is it possible to change the view so we can see each other's faces? Most of what I see is just questions. That's wonderful. First of all, I agree with my colleague, Ms. Compton Rigby, about the appreciation for your presentation. It was clear and incisive, and you really didn't leave any temptation for us to avoid the problems that you've discussed. I have a question about ethics and design. You recommend that we hire more quality assurance people, and I endorse that, and I'm sure the board will endorse that. But that doesn't really get at the essential problem with the 737 MAX. You mentioned the single sensor problem, and you also mentioned, or I'm not sure you mentioned what I think is the most serious mistake that Boeing made, which was to tell the airlines that they didn't have to train pilots on the new system, that it was just a modest change, and will add something to the pilot's handbook and checklist, but they don't need to spend very expensive time training on the system. And here's my question. If we put safety first, and by the way, we've always said that safety was first, but if we somehow re-elevate so that safety is really, really first, how do we integrate that with our design? Here's a dilemma. We make an improvement in a subsystem for the 777. Do we tell the airlines that they have to train all their pilots on it? Or can we just put a new page in the pilot's handbook? Obviously, training and training and training is always going to be safer and safer and safer. But if we require training on all changes, large, medium, and small, our airplanes are going to be so expensive that any sensible airline buyers will go to our competitors. So how do we integrate safety first, safety paramount, with our design? How do we do that better? Because we don't do it well.
So I think the concern is how do we integrate safety and make safety the priority again, while still being competitive in the way that, and having that competition still be there. And that is, it's a valid concern, especially for the pace that Boeing is in now. But I would like to invite everyone just to remember that you guys are Boeing. You have a long history of being the top and lead competitor in the industry because of the dedication to safety. People were willing to pay more for planes because they were reliable. Boeing not being transparent with the changes is what made people lose trust in Boeing in the first place. Now, if we continue to remain transparent with the issues that we face, as well as any changes within the system, people will begin to trust Boeing again. Now, this may result in training that's necessary for new planes, but the results of not including this training, especially for instances where it's a critical safety factor, such as with the 737 MAX, can result in what we've seen in the past few years, which is a huge loss of not only income, but also in just public trust. So the impacts of not doing so and not including these new trainings, especially ones that are up to FAA standards of what should be included in those new handbooks, has just a huge detriment, not only to us, but to any other airplane line that would do this. So we find that prioritization of safety is not only a want, a need, but it's also just necessary to continue to exist as a company within modern day aviation.
Further, that those PR kind of implications are costing Boeing a fortune. Going through the right channels and ensuring that there is more inspections and more training, while it is more costly, it's certainly less expensive than the lawsuits and the groundings that Boeing is currently facing. So in order to be in actual competition, once again, we have to focus on those lawsuits and we have to focus on the PR implications because it is costing Boeing so much.
Also, just the tragedy of the lives lost. Boeing shouldn't, we don't want to see any more lives lost just because of profit or the efficiency of putting out these planes rather than providing more training, or at least the training that is necessary to fly them in a safe manner.
Are we still in sort of supposed to be acting as a board, or can we sort of just have some more general stuff?
I have a
Allison,
board
we got
question.
about 5 minutes to go. Jeff, go ahead.
So I'm curious because I actually think that it was driven more by competition with Airbus and timing, trying to go fast.
Yeah, Allison, we got a few more minutes. Jeff, can you go ahead with your question?
Yeah, I'll try to make it short. I appreciate the presentation by the team. I need some pretty critical information though. I was a board member when these tragedies happened. I remember what it felt like with the loss of life. I remember what it felt like trying to find the answers, and it was gut wrenching. What I'm interested in now and what I expected today was some form of plan going forward for public relations. And what I have heard mostly is a reiteration of newscasts of our CFO reports and our market share, all of which were known before you came in. Now, you guys are very good at what you do. I know you've talked about this a lot, and you probably have some great ideas that maybe you haven't had a chance to bring forward. But comments like we have to prioritize safety over profits, to me, is a very broad brush. We have had millions of flights over the years. We had 2 that crashed, and not to bring this to a numbers game, but those were because of sensors. I find it hard to jump the gap from those 2 occurrences to a company-wide policy of not valuing safety more than we do profits. So it also occurs to me that that's probably how the public views us now as well. So what I'm interested in, other than a confidential hotline for employees to blow the whistle and some retraining here and there, what do we do with the public? I am a little concerned about offering public apologies because that often opens us to lawsuits. On an ethical perspective, I agree with you. On a financial perspective, that scares me, frankly. So other than that, what do we do going forward?
For sure. And so I definitely realize that admitting a mistake is a huge concern, but there's a lot of studies that have actually been done where it shows that more than 22% of consumers are likely to come back if an apology is issued, even with such a traumatic passing like we've had. And so it's actually better if we do issue that apology because it's statistically more likely for consumers to start to resurface. And while there is the concern of opening potential lawsuits, right now we're already a little bit worried about that with the China crashing. And so something needs to be done in a response to that. Obviously, Boeing's currently investigating the black box and is still trying to figure out what's happened. But immediately after what's being happened, it's that transparent part that is really going to start to impact the public. And it's really going to start to help kind of bring back consumer loyalty towards Boeing, mentioning that this is what happened within this crash, this is the solution, this is what Boeing is doing to fix it, is something that Boeing hasn't done within the past 2 crashes. And it's something that this new CEO can start to reinvigorate, which is that type of transparency. And we could obviously get into a few more intricacies, but issuing apologies and doing that transparency opens up the China market substantially. Right now, these planes are being grounded. Without a statement from Boeing, without that public recognition, it's going to hurt Boeing more than it would ever do for anything else. And I don't know if any of my partners want to jump in.
Yeah, I can just add on a little bit in terms of the legal repercussions. Boeing has already faced the blunt force, the largest blunt force from these legal proceedings following the first 2 crashes, especially the $2.5 billion settlement that was agreed upon with the DOJ. And so while there is definitely legal liability with a public apology, with a recognition of responsibility, at the same time, the timing is also lending its hand to Boeing in that the largest blunt force of those legal liabilities has already at least passed.
First of all, we're going to come out of character. I want to have a chance to give the team some feedback and certainly ask Bob, Jeff, and Allison to share their feedback as well. I'm going to go ahead and begin. So first of all, I'm an engineer. I've been an engineer throughout my career. I'm an R&D engineer. I went through nuclear power training in the Navy and spent 5.5 years on submarines. I appreciate that commercial airlines like nuclear submarines are profoundly complex environments, and safety, as you've advocated, is a critical part of what and how we operate. I do want to start, first of all, with Tianjin and Valley specifically, because the question that Jeff asked at the end I thought was challenging, but I thought you guys handled it well. And it's the kind of question where we have to begin. Everything in such an environment starts with leadership and culture. There are a number of mechanisms for how we advocate for, demonstrate, and embody safety in the way we operate. So I'll just share with you a few from having worked in nuclear power for several years. First of all, training. Training is remarkable. You have to be training virtually. If you're not sleeping, you're training. Inspectors and staff are the absolute last line of defense. You do not want to find problems in inspections or reviews. If you get to that point, you already have a problem. Release testing, systems testing, and redundancy are enormous. And most importantly, before anything else, if there's ever a system or process that in the consequence of failure will jeopardize operation, in this case of the aircraft, and certainly safety, it must fail safe. And obviously this system did not. So there are a whole host of issues and problems, but I didn't want to hear you guys tell me about those because we're not here at an engineering conference. We're here to talk about ethics and the finance and the other parts. And I thought you guys did a phenomenal job. I want to hit some of the highlights that I really valued what you did. First and foremost, great choice of topic. I did not know about the March 2022 crash. I was aware of the others, but the fact that another one just happened, whoever found this topic, well done. Okay, great job on the choice of topic. Very appropriate. At the same time, very challenging because you often don't know who you're talking to in the audience and what they know or don't. Okay. You reminded me of a good story that's in one of the Malcolm Gladwell books about an issue with Korean Air. I'm not going to go into the details, but we can talk about it later if you'd like. Check it out. In this case, the issue was with Korean Air, the airline, not with the plane manufacturer. But I like the fact that you talked about public, and I'm just going to go randomly. I'm not going to start in any particular order. But I liked how you talked in the context of public relations, both domestic and international, because it is a big deal. And if you are an international company and Boeing is, virtually the poster child for international operations for a U.S. company, how you operate is profound because they are fundamentally different environments inside and outside the U.S. Julia, I liked in the financial portion, you showed the stock charts. It is rare that an event or an ethical issue is going to show up in some of these stock charts. Yours did, and you picked up on it and showed it. Great contrast with Airbus, really good. I liked if I was going to ask you to spend any more time on anything, it would have been the code of ethics and the code of conduct. Obviously, you found them both, and I'm encouraged, and you did find them. Don't be afraid to stick Bowen's nose in both of those documents, because it's where it begins and we're training it to go as well. Okay, so well done. Tijan, I liked your advocating for speak up culture, listening to engineers. Maybe just because I am an engineer, I like it when people listen to what I have to say and when my concerns show up. That obviously is going to be a critical piece of Boeing's culture and how they operate going forward. Valley, I really liked the job you did across your entire topics, and also joining and adding to what Julian Tijan said in some of the Q&A portion. Right in with your teammates, being a team and not just leaving folks out there individually is the right way to speak to challenging audiences, okay? And Julia, human factors, well done. It is not a common theme or issue that we think of in design, but it is a critical piece of how we operate. We use human factors every day in the way we develop products at Becton Dickinson. So thanks for recognizing that as well. I could go on. Again, because I'm an engineer and you really grabbed me with the topic you chose, I'll yield to Allison, Jeff, and Bob to share their feedback. Allison, can you go ahead?
Sure.
Well,
Sure,
Go ahead,
I'll go ahead and add. I mean, you've said almost everything that one can say, but I will give you two sort of thoughts. One is that I felt a little bit like you were, this first happened 2 years ago, 2+ years ago, and I felt like you were sort of talking to us within the sort of 6 to 12 months of when we're just unraveling what happened, rather than where we are today, where the planes have been put back in the air. And 737 MAX has been flying. I hear a lot about the apology and about how people will sort of go back. The public, it doesn't think like that. I mean, the victims will never get on a Boeing plane again, the families of the victims. But I've flown. I couldn't tell you whether I was on a Boeing 737. I mean, I'm on a Boeing plane and I'm on an Airbus. It's not sort of the same image in the public's mind. But the PR, I think, is much more needs to be focused around the airlines that buy and fly those planes, because I don't think the public ever gets to make a decision about what sort of plane they get on. It's the one the airlines put in front of them. So it's building their business again that a lot of their PR effort has to go from. And I work in healthcare. And the reason I asked about sort of technology a little bit is that in healthcare, we are beginning to see errors happening by the clinical staff because they focus so much on the technology and they don't look at the patient anymore. They no longer have the seat of the pants sort of medical judgment. And I worry that airlines and complex machines like an airplane, they're going like the way some of the medical equipment is. I automatically, when I'm adding up on a calculator, I mentally back at the back of my head, I know what the number should roughly come out like because I do the fundamental behind it. The younger generation, you included probably, doesn't do quite the same back of the envelope, and they rely on the technology heavily. That means it's so important that we make the technology fail safe. And that's the biggest flaw that Boeing had, was they didn't make this with a single measuring thing. They didn't make it fail safe. So I think we have to learn a lot on all fronts. And I love the fact that you've picked this topic because it's an ongoing one. We've got to work as the technology it gets more complex. It means we've got to keep ahead of that. And Boeing failed to do that here. So I love the topic, and I think you've got a great presentation.
Hey, Bob or Jeff?
Yeah, I endorse what Allison and Kevin have said. I want to compliment you especially on your use of slides. I thought you did an extraordinary job of letting the listener follow both what you're saying and what they're seeing. And not all presentations are like that. Often the slide is up and the speaker is speaking, and you have to decide, do I want to listen to the speaker or do I want to read the slide? And in general, you'd solve that problem. The loose end ethically is this. Boeing can't put profits over safety any more than they can put safety over profits. They have to strive for absolute perfection in safety, and they have to strive for absolute dominance in profits. They've got to do both. And that's a problem for the finance people, and it's a problem for the engineering people, and it's a problem for the quality assurance people. And you haven't really helped us figure that one out. I think it's a very difficult problem, and I'm afraid that you and we and Boeing will have to struggle ahead without solving that. But that's the basic fundamental problem of ethics in an operation like Boeing's. You can always ask for more sensors, you can always ask for more training, and if you have more and more sensors and more training, you'll have an airplane that won't fly and nobody will buy. Period.
I find an interesting overlap with our experiences. Like Kevin and I worked on nuclear submarines at one time, and I understand critical systems, and I understand how complex systems can be. I don't imagine aircraft are really any different. Without a nuclear reactor, I'm sure they're probably less complicated in many ways. I've also seen in my careers, I guess more than one, the issues Julia was talking about too, where we're starting to rely on technology more than human input to our detriment. And that's actually one of the things that I'm doing now, is I'm working as a problem solver with our CEO in situations where technology has completely taken rationalization in the wrong direction. And I agree with Bob, the use of slides are really good. I also agree with some of the ethical content that was lacking, but in fairness, the ethical content I found that was lacking has been lacking by everybody. The airlines have missed it, the news have missed it, our engineers have missed it. It's not that it's a shortcoming, it's because it's a very difficult situation, and it still doesn't have a clear resolution. So no dings on not being able to solve a problem nobody else has been able to solve either. I do have a couple of broad-based sort of comments on your presentation. I really liked your use of slides. I think introducing your speakers with a slide like that served you very well. I see a lot of presentations, by the way, semi-professional. I say semi because there are people paid a lot of money to give presentations, but they're not terribly professional. So I did appreciate that. I got lost, I have to say, probably about 10 minutes in, or maybe a lot sooner really than that. My role was a board member. And a lot of the dialogue that I found was not, in my mind, going to serve you in front of a board. So this is more of an FYI for later on. When you talk to a board, the last thing that you want to say is that company ignored anything, because that leads to culpability. You also don't want to use language like Boeing didn't admit, because that presumes that they did something wrong and they weren't admitting it. My suggestions on the ways to get around that, instead of saying something like Boeing ignored concerns by employees, it's probably better suited to say that employee concerns were lost in the bureaucratic process. Because ignoring, again, points to culpability and it points a finger. And as a board member, the last thing I want to do is pay a consulting team. I was a consultant prior to where I am now, by the way, so there's a little bit of experience here. The last thing I want to do is pay a consulting team $1 million to scold me. So if most of your presentation centers around things that, as I said before, in the news or CFO reports, and you're telling me all the things that I did wrong and admonishing me for that, I'm going to leave. I've seen board members get up and walk out of the room, and we're not going to be happy. There needs to be a way out, even if it's not warranted. Okay, so even if Boeing did ignore things, they don't want to hire you to rub their nose in it. They need a soft way out to save face, but still address the problem. Okay, so that's just, a broad-based kind of FYI. I would have liked to have heard more about the pilots, because as a family member of a pilot, well, I'm not, but I mean, if I was a family member of a pilot, I'd be mad as hell. I would think that my brother or my father or my uncle who was piloting that aircraft was sold down the river by a shoddy training program that wasn't given any credibility in the broad scope of things. It didn't warrant any more than a page in a manual. And he was killed because of that. Not his fault, not the people on board. I mean, we focus a lot on the public, as well we should. But imagine the ethical duty that we blew to these pilots. These are the guys that we put people's lives in their hands, and this is an accountability that they willingly accept multiple times a day, and we sold them down the river. It cost them their life. And those are some of the ethical, that perspective I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. And then again, the PR part, how do we get across to the public that we're doing things very well now? And I appreciate transparency, especially in the financial reports, which you never see ethical components in a financial report. That was great. The transparency we have to be careful of, because understanding, like when I go back to when I was working on nuclear subs, there were things the public didn't know, and there were things the public should not know. Unless the public has a technical expertise in an area, transparency actually works backwards. Because now people don't really understand what they're hearing. They'll jump to conclusions. It'll create panic when it's not warranted. So some kind of a program or some kind of a set of guidelines on what level of transparency we have, how we bring it down to a layman's level so people really understand what it is without becoming dogmatic about it or without becoming a sort of a populist news source, are very important. And I think you have a lot of openings there to really make this type of recommendation to a board much stronger. Overall, I think you guys did a great job. It's a difficult situation. That's why I picked this one specifically, because I wanted to hear how you were gonna go after it. So thanks again.
Really good. Thanks, Jeff. University of South Florida team, thanks again for your work, your preparation, and in particular for your ingenuity in putting together the presentation and sharing it with our group this afternoon. If you want, you can give me a call. I'll put my number. Let's see. I'll communicate my number to Matt so he knows what it is. So let him know if you want to talk about it further. But otherwise, that ends our time together. Much appreciated. And judges, if you would, fill out your feedback forms and make sure we get them in so the IVECC team can integrate what we have for results. Okay. Any questions for the University of South Florida team for me or any of the other judges?
If we did want to contact you later,
To kind of connect in the hallway, have hallway conversations, see each other informally. Give me a call at that number. Text me ahead of time because I get calls like you all day long and I don't know the number. So text me this so I know who you are. And if I cannot talk, because I got some other things going on this afternoon, we'll agree when we can. Okay, but I am open here for about the next 20 minutes. Otherwise,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
speaking quickly to the teams, please, if you haven't already done so, please email Tom White the names of who is presenting in tomorrow's AM and PM sessions. Just a quick reminder.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you guys so much.
Yourself, well done. Thanks for your effort and your preparation. Judges, thanks for your time and contributions here. That's all we have. Thanks, Matt.
Take care, everyone.